my name is Michael. I'm coming to you from Waterloo Region. We're in Ontario, about an hour east of Toronto. And with us today is someone have much respect for from across the big pond. That would be the Atlantic, and it's Kristen Horsburgh from Scotland. So that's my best Scottish imitation. But, we're having some problems with the chat room, so I think we'll take questions at the end. And Christine is moderating, and she will be able to, I think, moderate questions at the end of Kirsten's presentation. Scotland's quite unique for many things, and certainly for a national rollout of a Naloxone program. No such thing in Canada, and in a couple of hours here in this part of the world, Kirsten, an outfit called the Canada Centre on Substance Abuse is going to launch a, well, they're calling it a national strategy, I believe, though no statutory authority. And but in a few hours, they're going to do a press conference in Ottawa. Interesting to see if Naloxone makes it onto the radar at all. It's certainly not currently on the radar of Health Canada and others at that federal level. And within Canada, 2 provinces offer Naloxone, but the uptake has been slow. Those provinces are Ontario and British Columbia, and both of them did it last year. So very excited to hear what you have to say, and thank you so much for joining us from across the big pond. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael. Good morning to everybody over there. I'd just like to firstly say thank you very much to Michael and his team for inviting me to talk to you today. The powers of social media. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about the Scottish Naloxone programme, and I promise I will try to put on my best accent to ensure that you can understand me over there. It's always a bit of a challenge. Anyway, as you know, my name's Kirsten Horsburgh, and I am the National Naloxone Coordinator at Scottish Drugs Forum. I've been in this position officially just over a month, and prior to that I was the National Naloxone Training and Development Officer, working alongside Stephen Malloy, who was the coordinator at the time, and he did some excellent work to get the programme established. So today I'm going to give you a bit of background, set the context, talk through the process to achieving our national programme and how this has taken shape. So we have approximately 5.2 million people in Scotland. There are 14 health boards in our National Health Service and 30 alcohol and drug partnerships. And ADPs are multi-agency groups in place to develop and implement local and alcohol and drug strategy. There are 16 prisons within the Scottish Prison Service. It's estimated there are almost 60,000 people classed as problem drug users over here. Now, the term problem drug use here means people who specifically have problematic use of opiates or benzodiazepines. There are just under 33,000 people known to services, and between 22 to 25,000 people on methadone. We also have a national drug strategy which is called the Road to Recovery. Within this strategy there is also reference to reducing drug-related deaths in Scotland. So moving on then to have a look at drug-related deaths in Scotland, we have had an upward trend, as you can see from this graph. In 2011 we had our highest ever recorded number of people lose their lives at 584. There are now an average of 529 people dying every year, and the tragedy is that it's likely that many of these deaths could have been prevented. Every August the National Records of Scotland publish the annual drug-related death figures, and the following spring there's a drug-related death database report published which gives us more details regarding the personal circumstances of the people who died. When we look at the age and sex of people who died in 2011, we can see that the highest number of people dying are male and aged between 35 and 44, and that continues to be quite consistent over the years. Looking at the drugs that were present in people's bodies when they died. Now, these figures I've put up here are higher than the numbers where the substance was implicated or causal in the death. These figures are all the drugs that were found to be in the person's body, but it's really to give you an idea of the polydrug use here. So we talk about the 4 main drugs that are involved in overdose, which you can see are heroin, benzos, alcohol and methadone. They're all central nervous system depressants, and crucially 2 of the main 4 are opioids, which is an important factor when we have a medication at our disposal that can reverse the effects of these drugs. And as you can see by the numbers, there's a lot of polydrug use and especially a lot of diazepam use over here. Some of the common circumstances in fatal overdoses that we know about here. People are generally in their own or a friend's home when they die. They have experienced non-fatal overdoses, and generally recently. Several hours have passed between the actual overdose and death. You know, this isn't something that's happening instantly. A person's breathing is depressed over some time. It tends to be the older, more experienced injector. There are other drugs present, particularly other central nervous system depressants, and there has been a recent abstinence or reduction in use. The last point is that a high percentage of the time witnesses are present. So this might be other users who haven't recognised the person has overdosed, or we hear a lot from family members who say, for example, I've seen my son like that before, I heard him snoring, I thought he was asleep, I got up in the morning and I found him dead. Why did no one tell me that snoring could be a sign of overdose? So the important thing here is that often people are there with a potential to intervene. On a bit of a lighter note for this slide, I might just add that I used to have a picture of a band called The Witnesses from Brooklyn in the place of those 3 stick men, but I thought I might have been breaching some kind of copyright, so hence I've replaced them. Okay, so now we're getting to the business end, so we'll go back to 2005 where a few things happened at once. We have a Medicines Act which contains a list of prescription-only medicines that can be administered by the public for the purpose of saving a life, so things like adrenaline. And naloxone was added to this list in 2005, so let's be clear that anyone can administer naloxone for the purpose of saving life. At the same time, there were recommendations from the Scottish Advisory Committee on Drug Misuse regarding naloxone, and the National Forum on Drug-Related Death was established. The National Forum makes recommendations to Scottish Government ministers, alcohol and drug partnerships and others on action and policy changes regarding in relation to the reduction in drug-related deaths. Then, very exciting, there was a multi-agency fact-finding trip organised to the Chicago Recovery Alliance to learn from their successful naloxone programme. But unfortunately, that was before my time. Devastated that I missed out on that. Also wondering, did I really just put that slide on an international webinar? But yes, I believe I did. So the next few steps that took place were 3 pilots took place for take-home naloxone in Scotland in 3 different areas between 2006 and 2009. During this period, there were also recommendations regarding naloxone from the National Forum. All the pilots were evaluated and demonstrated successes. One of the recommendations from the National Forum was that take-home naloxone be available to all high-risk individuals released from custody, in recognition that people are at higher risk of overdose in the first 3 months post-liberation. And then finally, the programme was announced by Fergus Ewing, who was the Minister for Community Safety at the time. And it was also, and it continues to be, fully funded and supported by the Scottish Government and the Drug Policy Unit. So there were 3 posts funded. The already existing critical incidents post in Scottish Drugs Forum became the National Training Lead and would go on to then become the National Naloxone Coordinator role. 2 training and development officers were appointed. One of the first tasks was to develop training resources and materials, some of which you can see there. The two-day training for trainers was rolled out across Scotland to allow staff and services to begin training people at risk of overdose. There was also training delivered to staff in the Scottish Prison Service, as all prisons are signed up to the programme. Support was offered to health board areas and alcohol and drug partnerships to get local programmes established and to identify a local coordinator for each area. And the basic life support programme that was utilised in training was the British Heart Foundation's Heart Start training. So once the staff are trained to deliver a session, this is really what the session includes. There's overdose prevention, what naloxone is and how it works, how to assemble and administer the naloxone, how to provide basic life support and the importance of calling an ambulance. Finally, who to report to if you've had to use it and how to access a resupply. Now, initially these sessions were trialled and aimed at group training. There's absolutely no doubt that if you're able to provide this training to a group of people over a couple of hours, then that's kind of the gold standard. But we live in the real world and appreciate that this is not always possible. So the majority of training that's done across Scotland now is done as a brief intervention over around 20 minutes. It just really needs to be opportunistic and making use of the time that you have with that person there and then. A patient group direction is what allows nurses and pharmacists to make supply of take-home naloxone without a prescription. A national naloxone PGD was developed and then amended by local areas. So each health board area has a PGD and nurses or pharmacists who have completed training for trainers sign up to this. The supply of naloxone can be made to anyone aged 16 plus with a history or current use of opiates, regardless of whether they're attending a treatment service or not. It can also be supplied to family members or carers with the consent of the person at risk of overdose. The reason that the supply is restricted to named patients only is due to its status as a prescription-only medicine. But remember, there are no restrictions for who can administer it. Okay, so lost my train of thought a wee bit there. The Lord Advocate guidelines. Hang on till I've just now given it away that I'm working from a bit of a script here. The Lord Advocate guidelines was basically in place due to the supply of restrictions. A covering letter was required from the Lord Advocate to allow the supply of naloxone to services in contact with people at risk of opiate overdose. The Lord Advocate's the Chief Legal Officer of the Scottish Government for civil and criminal matters, and in March 2011 these guidelines were produced.